Bilbo Baggins was not the hero, at least in this chapter. As readers of The Hobbit know, Bilbo has an incredible character arc in which he goes from a kind and reserved hobbit of the Shire to a courageous and stealthy burglar who alters the fate of Middle-earth itself. But in Chapter 2 of The Hobbit, he's just getting started, and nowhere near ready to take the reins. In fact, while his new companions are captured by trolls, he does nothing. However, in Peter Jackson's Hobbit film trilogy, many liberties were taken, one of which being the revision of many great deeds which put the focus on Bilbo. Whether it was facing down Azog himself to protect Thorin, or simply buying time for them before a sunrise, Bilbo was always made the hero. But that's not the case in the book, which is why in this video, I'll be comparing these scenes of The Hobbit to their corresponding pages in Tolkien's novel. And I bet by the end of this video, you'll have learned something about this story that you didn't know before. My name is Gibby, and welcome back to episode 2 of Movies vs. Manuscripts, The Hobbit Edition. If you're new here, this is the show in which I compare books to their film adaptations and find all the differences along the way. I've already covered Chapter 1 of The Hobbit, so if you missed that, then be sure to head to my channel and watch it after this video. Also, shout out to these commenters from the first episode. It means so much to me that you all have stuck around after the Lord of the Rings series and are brave enough to embark on this new adventure with me. As always, I'll cover all the changes between these two mediums across the 4 major categories of characters, timeline, location, and plot. But first, let's kick things off by refreshing our memory on these scenes of the film. That way, it's fresh on our mind for the analysis. Picking up with where we left off last week, we see Bilbo waking up the morning after his unexpected dinner party and seeing his home completely empty. Not only empty, but clean. It almost seems like the previous night was a bad dream until he spots the contract that Thorin had given him. The movie then cuts as he sprints through the Shire and eventually catches up to Gandalf and the dwarves, and then they officially set off on their adventure. We see a traveling montage which includes beautiful sights and a moment of the company camping out as Balin shares the story of Thorin and how he defeated the Pale Orc in a battle to reclaim the ancient kingdom of Moria. Then the movie cuts to another day as it's raining on the company, which then helps the movie transition to a new character in the story, Radagast. We see the brown wizard bustling about as he tries to save one of the animals in his area from a dark magic or a poison of some sort. Afterwards, he follows some spiders as they head to wherever they came from, and he sees Dol Guldur. But before the fun starts there, the movie cuts back to the dwarves who have found a spot to camp. Gandalf leaves them after getting into an argument with a very stubborn Thorin, and as the night progresses, we learn that Fili and Kili have lost some of their ponies. Bilbo and the 2 young dwarves then investigate further and see a troll carrying off 2 more of their ponies. So Fili and Kili task Bilbo with going to free the ponies and to investigate the trolls. You're probably familiar with what happens next, as it's one of the most iconic parts of the Hobbit book and movies. Bilbo goes up and gets caught by the trolls, and then the dwarves get caught as well in an attempt to attack the 3 beasts. Ultimately, Bilbo stalls the trolls by telling them different ways of cooking the dwarves, while Gandalf comes up from behind, breaks a massive rock, and reveals the sun which turns the trolls to stone. After the dwarves and Bilbo are all freed, they find the trolls hide out in a cave. Some of the dwarves bury some treasure, while Gandalf and Thorin find some nice elvish blades. Gandalf even finds a small blade for Bilbo, which we know as Sting. And that is where our scenes cut off for this week's episode. So let's not waste any more time and jump right into things by heading into our first 3 categories of characters, timeline, and location. This week, these 3 categories are pretty simple. As for characters, we only have a couple of issues. First, Radagast isn't present in the Hobbit book. He is mentioned, but as you know if you watched episode 1 of the series, the whole necromancer subplot is made up. So this scene we see in the film appears nowhere in the book. Besides that, the only other character issue we have is the fact that Dain and his father Nain are not really present in the battle to reclaim Moria. In the true version of the story, which I'll elaborate on in the plot changes, Dain and Nain are kind of the main characters of that fight, not Thorin. Anyway, next we would typically have timeline, but that actually gets a pass this week. So, moving on to location, we have one missing place of note, which is the Green Dragon. Yep, that's the same Green Dragon in the Shire, which we know and love from The Lord of the Rings. But we'll see how that location is involved as we get into the first couple of plot changes. Before we do though, I wanted to shout out Jason, Cody, Joshua, and all of my other incredible Patreon supporters who make videos like this possible every month. You guys are the best. Also, I should remind everyone who's new here that I try my best not to dive into every piece of dialogue from the book or movie, because that would take literally forever, and we all can agree that a movie won't take things word for word from a book when it comes to conversations, or else everything would be way too long. So that being said, if you're interested in hearing the exact dialogue from the book and want to follow along with me as I do this series, then I highly recommend checking out the Hobbit audiobook on Audible. Andy Serkis narrates it, and he does a fantastic job. You can use the link in the description to claim it for free, which also supports the channel, no purchase necessary. Anyway, with that being said, let's jump into the plot changes. Starting with Bilbo waking up alone in his home, we have an immediate difference, which is the fact that in the book, his house is a mess. The dwarves did indeed have the breakfast they discussed the night before, and this time did not sing a fun song while cleaning up. Nope, they left the mess for Bilbo, reminding him of the crazy night he had just had with them. And that brings us to the second change, which is kind of a big one, and that is that Bilbo doesn't run off after the dwarves. He actually just makes breakfast, determined to move on with his life. He does have a brief moment of FOMO, but quickly stuffs it down as he reminds himself that he is not cut out for adventures. So what does get him to leave his cozy hobbit hole? Well, in the book, Gandalf actually comes back for him. As Bilbo eats breakfast, Gandalf storms in and asks what he's doing. He then shows Bilbo a letter from Thorin which was set on the mantelpiece, and it states that Bilbo is accepted as the 14th member of the company and to meet them at the Green Dragon where they'll wait for him until 11 a.m. Bilbo tried to put up a fight, but Gandalf wouldn't let him get a word in and essentially forced him out the door. And considering that 11 a.m. was only about 10 minutes away, Bilbo ran as fast as he could to get to the Green Dragon in time. And with that, the adventure could begin. Now, because of this massive change to the narrative, there are two smaller points that are affected. First, there is no contract, but rather the letter from Thorin is the agreement, outlining Bilbo's share of the loot and so forth. No big, long, multi-page document like the movie shows. And second, there is no bet on whether or not Bilbo would show up. Which brings us to another change, as you might have noticed one missing character here. After all, Gandalf went to get Bilbo, but he didn't run with him to the dwarves. So where is Gandalf? Well, in the book, Gandalf meets up with the company after they had already set out. Atop a great white horse, Gandalf had brought Bilbo some of his things from home, including a few of his handkerchiefs and his pipe and tobacco. And now that the adventure has begun and our company plus Gandalf are moving throughout the lands, we come upon the first of many massive changes we'll encounter throughout this entire series. After a brief traveling montage, we see Thorin's company camping out and listening to the sound of orcs in the distance. Then Balin shares how Thorin got his name, which is one of his largest character-defining moments. Well, sadly for movie Thorin, this never happened. You see, the story of the dwarves' fight for Moria is much different in Tolkien's lore. Thror, Thorin's grandfather, was not killed in the battle shown in the movie. He and one other dwarf went to investigate Moria by themselves after Smaug took Erebor. This proved to be a very dumb decision, as Azog, who had claimed Moria as his own, killed Thror. He beheaded the dwarf king and carved his name into his forehead, then tossed it to Nar, the dwarf who had went with Thror. Azog also tossed Nar a small pouch full of coins as a mock payment for the king's death. Then, as the orcs continued to desecrate Thror's body, Nar went back to his people, and the 7 dwarf houses united to begin a war against Azog and the orcs. This war took 3 years to plan and culminated in the battle that we see in this scene of the movie, known as the Battle of Zan-Ubazar. By the way, I'm definitely saying that wrong. Anyway, Thorin was most likely present for this battle, but was not the main character. One point that the movie got right was that Azog wanted to wipe out Durin's folk, and he succeeded in killing Nain, Dane Ironfoot's father. Dane then fought Azog, defeated him, and beheaded him, which by the way definitively proves Azog is dead, unlike the Hobbit trilogy which leaves his death ambiguous. Anyway, that being said, I totally see why they changed this for the movie, because Dane is not the main character here. Thorin needed something for us viewers to latch onto. Plus, with them keeping Azog alive, this made a lot more sense. But at the end of the day, it's still very different from the original. But there's a lot more to cover, so let's move past this scene and move into our next change, which can be a pretty easy one because it brings us to Radagast, who as we know, isn't in the book in the same capacity. So this whole scene of him saving a hedgehog and chasing spiders to Dol Guldur never happened. But you know what did happen? Their encounter with trolls. So let's dive into the most important part of today's scenes and figure out exactly what Bilbo did or didn't do, and how Peter Jackson may or may not have made him out to be more of a hero than he really was. Our first change with this sequence is that in the book, Gandalf is missing by the time they find a spot to camp. Plus, it is raining when this happens. The movie kind of moved around this raining moment to earlier in the journey, but in actuality, it happens here. That's not the focus of this change, though. The fact that Gandalf isn't there is the bigger difference, because that means that his conversation with Thorin never happens. Gandalf isn't there to see a destroyed farm home. He doesn't tell them to move on. He doesn't argue with Thorin about getting help from the elves. That is all made up. Next, their discovery of the trolls is vastly different. In the book, we read about them losing a great deal of their provisions as one of the ponies got spooked and ran into the river. Fili and Kili got the pony out, but the packs on the pony got taken by the stream. So the dwarves were hangry, cold, and wet from the rain. And in the distance, Balin spots a light. The dwarves then gather around and they all start arguing with each other about how to proceed. Eventually, they decide that their resident burglar should go investigate. So I'll count this all wrapped up as one change, but really, no, they don't see a troll carry off ponies. And no, Fili and Kili don't keep this a secret, but rather all the dwarves see a light in the distance. Next, after Bilbo sneaks up and recognizes the creatures as trolls, he decides to pick the pockets of one of them. He isn't trying to grab a knife to free any ponies because, like I just said, the trolls never took their ponies. The trolls have sheep. But wanting to do something and not come back empty-handed, Bilbo attempts to pick the pocket of William, one of the trolls, and gets caught. By the way, there's a part here where it seems like the purse Bilbo snatches actually speaks. But I don't know if I was just reading that wrong. So if you're familiar with this part of the book, let me know in the comments what you think. Anyway, the next change is the beginning of our Bilbo anti-hero arc, as Book Bilbo accidentally lets it slip that there are others out there with him. In the movie, he does the right thing and tells the trolls that he is alone. But Book Bilbo speaks before he thinks and says yes in response to their question about if there are other Burr-hobbits out there. He then quickly says no, confusing the trolls on how it can be yes and no. Another change to this moment, which is quite a unique one, is that William, the troll who caught Bilbo, actually suggests letting him go. The trolls realize that he's way too tiny to eat, and William almost seems to pity Bilbo and the way he's squirming around. Unfortunately, the other two trolls are now on alert because of Bilbo saying that there are others like him in the woods. So they refuse to let William let him go. But trolls being trolls, they get into a fight and drop Bilbo. Bilbo has just enough wits to scramble up and hide in the trees after this. But unfortunately, right as the trolls are arguing and fighting, Balin comes into the clearing to see what the commotion is. The trolls shriek when they see him because all trolls hate dwarves, and they quickly throw a sack over Balin's head and then hide in the woods. And this is our next change, because in the movie, we see the dwarves come out all at once and start fighting the trolls in an attempt to save Bilbo. But in the book, the dwarves do maybe the worst possible thing, and one by one come into the clearing. The trolls, who have more brains than you think, simply waited in hiding for each dwarf to come and then they would jump out and bag them. Thorin was the last one to come out, and he at least put up a fight, getting a good couple hits in before being captured. But you know who isn't captured? Bilbo. That's right, unlike the film, Bilbo had gotten away and was hiding in a nearby bush. And therefore, he had the perfect opportunity to do something about this sticky situation. Except he didn't, which is our next change. As Bilbo doesn't save the day, Gandalf does. And the way in which Gandalf saves the day is honestly pretty entertaining. In the book, we read that Bilbo was listening to the trolls' conversation about how to eat the dwarves when suddenly William the troll said it would be no good to roast the dwarves because it would take all night. But when the other trolls told him to stop arguing, William said that he didn't say anything. Then one of the other trolls would say something and later deny that he said anything. This repeats over and over, confusing the trolls and making them argue with one another until Gandalf's voice rang out above theirs and said, "Dawn take you all and be stoned to you." And with that, the light of the sun crested the hill and turned the trolls to stone. It wasn't until just then that Bilbo realized what had happened. Gandalf had been impersonating the voices of the trolls and causing arguments to stall for time. Bilbo, meanwhile, had stayed put in his bush with his clothes and skin torn and done nothing, which honestly is expected. It's not like he's done a bunch of these adventures. He's not a veteran in these kinds of affairs, and it's probably the first time that he's ever seen a troll or even gotten scraped up this much. But of course, in an attempt to keep him the center of attention in the movie, Bilbo is the one who stalls the trolls and saves the day. And honestly, I really like the movie version, but let me know in the comments which version you prefer. Anyway, we aren't done just yet, as there are still a handful of other changes regarding the final moments of this chapter. First, the troll cave in the book suggests that these creatures are a bit more civilized than the movie shows. It even has a door with a lock. plus edible food and some ale, which the dwarves take to replenish the stock that they had lost to the river. Also, Bilbo in the book slightly redeems himself by revealing that he had stolen one thing from the trolls, and that was a key, which just so happened to be the key they needed to unlock the troll's door. So I guess Bilbo in the book did something good here after all. Next, they don't bury treasure in the cave like the movie shows, but they actually take it outside a bit and bury it along the path. But that's not the interesting part. The interesting thing about this buried treasure is that they put spells over the top of their deposit to ward off thieves. This is almost a side comment by Tolkien and not at all the focus, but I do like the idea that dwarves have more magic about them than they get credit for in the movie. Next, another offhand comment from Tolkien is when Bilbo gets sting. It's not a whole moment in which Gandalf finds the blade and then gives it to Bilbo along with a wise quote like the movie shows. It's literally just, oh yeah, we found some swords, one of which is a good size for Bilbo, and that's it. But again, I gotta say I prefer the movie version, especially with the context that the Lord of the Rings viewers know this blade. So it's kind of nice to focus on it for a minute to pay homage to the origin of this iconic weapon. Moving on to our second to last change, the movie removed the details of why Gandalf came back. Although the quotes from the movie are pulled from the book, there's a bit more description of Gandalf's side journey. In the book, he tells Thorin that he was going further ahead to scout their road when he ran into 2 of Elrond's folk. The elves then informed him of 3 trolls who had come down from the mountain, and Gandalf immediately turned back to head towards the company. I like this context in the book, and more importantly, Thorin doesn't throw a fit when Gandalf mentions Elrond's folk. And now finally, our last change this week is kind of a sneak peek into the next episode, because our scene cuts off abruptly right here with them hearing something approaching in the woods. We'll learn in the next episode that this is Radagast, so I won't get into that right now, but what I will say is that there was no immediate danger in the book. In fact, after pilfering through the troll's cave, they slept until the afternoon to make up for the sleep they lost that night. There's no orc pack nipping at their heels like the movie shows. But again, that's a problem for episode 3 of this series. For now, let me know in the comments what you think about these crazy scenes. What would you have done differently? Do you think Peter Jackson and his team made the right choices for this chapter? As always, thanks for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed. Check out the series playlist to catch up on any episodes you might have missed, or binge watch the whole series right now if you're watching this in the future. Thanks again to my patrons, have a great week, and I'll see you in the next episode.